Hello everyone, a very warm welcome to all to today's Tech Tuesdays webinar on EDC 10.5 upgrade. I am Vrinda, your host for today's session. The speaker for this session is Stein Carrion, who has been with Informatica for over 13 years and supports data engineering, enterprise data catalog, and cloud data integration products in the EMEA region. Before we start this webinar, here are some housekeeping tips. The duration of the webinar is 1 hour. That includes a 15 minutes Q&A. You can post your queries in the Q&A box. Dial-in participants are muted for the entire session. The session is being recorded and will be available in the Informatica Support YouTube channel and the Success portal. You'll be able to download the slide deck from the Success portal. You can also put in your feedbacks and suggestions in the post-webinar survey and let us know your thoughts about the session. The Tech Tuesdays webinars are hosted within the Success portal, which is a microlearning platform that offers free and unlimited learning to all registered users. This feature-rich platform was launched to help you learn and use Informatica products better. We have launched a data governance learning path in the Success portal that will enable you to implement data-centric approach to compliance based on your role. Here are a few important links that you can go over later that will help you in your product adoption journey with Informatica. Over to you, Stein. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction and welcome once again on this Tech Tuesday session regarding EDC 10.5. Let's start off with a quick look at the agenda. We'll discuss the 10.2 and 10.4 end of life. We will have a look at the architecture of 10.5 and mainly at the differences between the old 10.4 setup and the new 10.5 architecture. Then we'll have a look at the cluster service, the Informatica Cluster Service, which is a new service in 10.5, which is replacing the 10.4 Informatica Hadoop service and which will be central to your EDC architecture. We'll have an overview of the upgrade steps that are required to migrate your environments from 10.4 to 10.5. We'll have a quick look at the 10.5 version numbers, the version numbering that we currently have in place, and the patching that is related to that. And then we will conclude with a list of some useful resources which you can review in your own time in order to prepare for your environment's upgrades. We will stop the session, or we'll end the session with a Q&A in the chat. So you can put your questions in the chat window during the presentation. We will try and answer on the chat as we go along, and we will then summarize the main questions at the end of the session. So the 10.2 and then 10.4 end of life. So 10.2 and 10.4 EDC will no longer be supported by the end of March 2022, which is not that long away. It's only about 6 months away now. The 10.2 and 10.4 EDC versions have always been very reliant on the Cloudera HDP distribution, which will be end of life at the end of this year, which is the reason why Informatica as well had to move away from the Hadoop architecture. Going forward, we will be using a combination of MongoDB and Nomad as the main third-party components, which will create the new cluster architecture as a replacement of HDP. We recommend all of our EDC customers to upgrade to 10.5 well in advance of the March 2022 deadline in order to make sure that all of your environments are in a supported setup by that time. So in terms of architecture, let's have a look. So what we had before 10.4.1 was obviously based on Hadoop. You might have had your external cluster, but most of the customers would have been using the internal HDP cluster. So obviously we were very reliant on a yarn to run our scanners and our compute engine, we were reliant on HBase and HDFS for storage. So all of that has changed, and as you can see, the main component right now in 10.5 will be MongoDB. So MongoDB will be used as our storage layer, both the graph database as well as the GridFS for file storage. In parallel with MongoDB, we will always also use Nomad. Nomad will be used for the computational engine and our scanning engine instead of Spark on Yarn. So in terms of the architecture diagram, the Informatica server has not changed. So you still have your Informatica domain, your Informatica node, where you'll have your model repository service, you'll have your DIS, you'll have your analyst service potentially, and there will now be a new Informatica cluster service. So the Informatica cluster service will be managing the new Informatica cluster services. So the Nomad, the MongoDB, Solar, and Zookeeper as well, which are still there. And the EDC will now connect to the Informatica cluster service instead of to the old Informatica Hadoop service. In terms of profiling, you'll still see that there is a Hadoop component here. So if we want to profile any resources in Spark mode, we will still be reliant on a Hadoop cluster to be able to run the Spark profiling part on a Hadoop cluster. Obviously, native profiling will be done directly on the data integration service, so then there won't be any dependency to this Hadoop cluster. So let's move on to the next slide. But this is just giving a quick overview of how the scanners are working now in 10.5. So in first step, the scanner framework will launch an application on Nomad, which will be running on one of your cluster nodes. And the application will read the MRS configuration. And then the scanner application will spawn a scanner agent that extracts the metadata directly from the source or through the EDC agents. In case of relational resources, you might be wanting to profiling, so the scanner app will send requests to the data integration service in order to run the profiling. Scanner process will read the profile results from the profile warehouse, and once all the scanner stages are completed, the metadata and there you go, the metadata and profile research are loaded into MongoDB to be processed by the ingestion service. The ingestion service will then process the metadata and ingest it into the graph database and in the index. When Similarity Discovery Scanner is running, it reads the metadata from the catalog and will write this into the commit store to be processed by the ingestion service. But that is a quick overview of how the whole scanner framework is working now in 10.5, in the new 10.5 non-Hadoop infrastructure. So all these services, all these Nomad and MongoDB services and any other additional services are managed by Informatica, more specifically by a new service which you will have in your domain, which is the Informatica Cluster Service. So you will have multiple nodes that are deployed by the Informatica Cluster Service. I mean, it is possible to have only one node, but in a typical production scenario, you would have at least 3 or more nodes, and those nodes will have different roles. So you will have nodes that are hosting the Nomad for the scanner execution and the processing. You will have nodes that are hosting the MongoDB and the MongoDB GridFS as a storage layer. Then there will be Solar and Zookeeper, which are used for the index storage and service coordination respectively. They will be deployed on all of your cluster nodes. You get PostgreSQL as well, which will be deployed for your Similarity storage. In order to get this working on 10.5, you just need to be aware that a new license key is required. You can request the license key, a 10.5 license key from shipping, to make sure that your cluster service can start. So all of the components on any software that we use, like Nomad, MongoDB, Postgres, are packaged with the Informatica binary and will be deployed automatically by the Informatica Cluster Service, so that there is no more need to install any component manually on the cluster nodes. Just a quick screenshot on what the Informatica Cluster Service wizard in the administrator looks like. So you'll define your gateway host, which is one of the nodes on your cluster, which will be used to access all of the other nodes. Data nodes you configure will be correspondent to the MongoDB nodes. The processing nodes will be the Nomad processing modes where the actual scanners will be running on. So where does the cluster service sit? So the cluster service will sit underneath the catalog service. So the catalog service will communicate directly with the Informatica Cluster Service in order to launch any jobs on the cluster. So what would a typical cluster configuration look like for most of our customers? So in a typical setup, you'd have three nodes where you have, this is not including the Informatica installation, of course, these are just purely cluster nodes. So you have your Informatica installation that's sitting outside of this. So you'll have one gateway node, which is at the same time a worker node, which will host your Nomad server, MongoDB, and Zookeeper, Solr, and Postgres. And then together with those, you'll have two additional worker nodes for MongoDB and Nomad. In terms of creation of the cluster service, in 10.5, just like in previous versions, if your domain is SSL enabled, your Informatica Cluster Service will also need to be SSL disabled. Now, regarding the SSL situation, 10.5 is now using two-way SSL, and there are a few restrictions with the certificates in terms of which SSL parameters are supported. So there's a new set of certificates that will need to be created if you are using CA signed certificates. I will provide a link later on in the useful resources section where you can review the scripts to use to generate the right SSL certificates. Sudo access will be required during the installation or whenever you are running a clean of the cluster in order to redeploy all of the services. And then the ICS, you get again an overview of what you can configure in terms of single node, which would be more like for a sandbox environment. You'll have a 3 nodes, which would be like a development environment. Or 6 nodes where you have additional nodes specifically serving as data nodes and processing nodes split up into separate groups. These are just some additional screenshots in terms of the ICS creation. So as we said, we configure the host, you configure the username, so the user again will require passwordless SSH access to all the nodes in order to allow the deployment of all the services. We have a cluster custom directory, so by default you'll have /opt informatica/ICS, which is being used. This can be customized to any directory on your cluster nodes. And then for each of the services, we allow to specify which host you want to run a specific service on, and you can also configure the ports for each of the services if for whatever reason you do not want to use the default port range. The performance of the cluster service can be expected to be more performant than what you had in the Informatica Hadoop service. So as a baseline, you should expect on-par performance, but from our in-house testing, we can say that, yeah, typically speaking, the execution time of scanners is faster than what we had in 10.4. Also, the starting and the stopping of the cluster service takes less than 5 minutes, whereas the whole Hadoop infrastructure was a bit slower to start up. We also see increased stability as compared to HTTP cluster deployments. In terms of sizing, the sizing has actually not changed from 10.4. So whatever sizing you had done for 10.4 can be reused for 10.5. So you can refer to the sizing and performance choosing guide with that additional information, but this is giving you a quick overview of what the sizing is required for EDC 10.5, which is identical to 10.4, so you should not have any surprises there. So that's an overview of the new 10.5 architecture, how the components work together, and how the deployment is done. So we'll have now a closer look at the upgrade paths and the required steps. So most of you on this webinar will either already have started operating 10.5 potentially, or you are currently on 10.2 or 10.2 or 10.4 product ranges. So at the moment, we support a direct upgrade path from any 10.4 release. So as long as you have 10.4, you can directly upgrade to 10.5. If, however, you are still on 10.2 or any 10.2 release, you will need to do an intermediate upgrade to 10.4 before going to 10.5. And as mentioned previously, make sure when you do start the 10.5 upgrade that you request a new 10.5 license key from our shipping team. So a quick overview on the steps required for upgrading from 10.4 or 10.4.1 to 10.5. So the first diagram we'll look at is for the scenario where you have an external cluster. So you obviously start off with your backups that you'll take in 10.4. They'll then be upgraded. You will upgrade the binaries to 10.5. In 10.5, so that's for the Informatica side. From the cluster side, you'll take your backup of your external cluster, after which you'll migrate and restore that to the Informatica cluster. And then the high level for the internal cluster, so the same thing, you'll take the backups first. And the difference here is once you've backed up the internal Hadoop cluster in 10.4, we're going to also clean that cluster, and then those nodes will be able to be recommissioned as new Informatica cluster nodes. Now let's have a look at a more detailed diagram. So here we got all the steps for both the internal and external cluster, because the backing up of the data and the restoring of the data will be the same for all of them. So we'll start off by taking a backup of your MRS and your catalog service command. So catalog service, and that can be done with the infacmd command line. The second step will be an export of your catalog service content using a new 10.5 binary. So that second backup will actually be used to restore your 10.4 content into 10.5 environments. So that is more like the migration backup from 10.4 to 10.5. whereas the forced backup in the fourth step, which is the catalog service backup, will just be used for rollback purposes. You will then proceed with disabling all of your services, and in case of an internal cluster, you will do a cleanup of a cluster service and remove Postgres in order to reuse those nodes as Informatica cluster nodes in 10.5. So you will then proceed with shutting down your Informatica domain and then start the upgrade process in the 10.5 installer. You will add your new license key. So you will, after you upgrade, you will add the new 10.5 license key. You will need to reassign that license key to your existing services. And you will then be taken through the upgrade process to upgrade your MRS, your DIS, and your CMS. One point noting there is, in case you had any specific HTTP custom properties defined in 10.4, you might want to remove this in 10.5, as they will no longer be valid. We will then enable the ICS in the new 10.5 environment and reassign that ICS to your catalog service. So once the catalog service has been upgraded, we will then be able to migrate the content, so the content which was taken in step 2, which is the export of the CS content, will then be re-imported and re-indexed into the 10.5 catalog service. Post-upgrade, you will need to re-import your data domains. You will need to rerun the scanner for some resources. I will provide a list of which resources will need to be rescanned. And you will then also create and run the Similarity discovery if required. So those are the main steps required in terms of upgrading from 10.4 to 10.5. So just as a reminder, in 10.5, when you run the 10.5 installer, you will go and choose option 2, which is an upgrade of your Informatica products to version 10.5. So this is again a quick overview on the steps required. So you've got a backup. You've got what you have here as well is you've got the corresponding commands. For instance, you've got the infacmd sh ldm backup command. You've got the ICS clean cluster. You've got also the new Informatica cluster validation utility, where you can check if your cluster nodes have all the right prerequisites into place. And you've got the migrate contents. So this is just, again, an overview, a text format of this slide, basically. In terms of the upgrade process, you might want to tune the heap size in case you have a lot of assets that need to be migrated. That is in order, obviously, to avoid out-of-memory issues and making sure that the migration goes in a timely manner. So this gives you an idea of what kind of heap sizes we recommend based on the number of assets and the kind of time you can expect for the migration to take. So anything less than 5 million, you'll have less than 1.5 hours. But if you are talking about tens or even 100 million of assets, that migration might obviously take quite a long time. So as I mentioned earlier on, after the upgrade of the catalog service, you might need to rerun some resources. You can find the list of resources that will need to be rescanned below. And I won't just read them all back, but have a look at them. Obviously, there's Informatica Platform, which is a very common one. You've got Hive, Amazon S3. So all of these will just need to be rescanned following the 10.5 upgrade. So Similarity results are not migrated. So you will need to create a new Similarity discovery resources. in 10.5, and then rerun those resources if similarity discovery is required. So just a reminder about 10.5 version numbers. So in 10.5, we will be providing, just like in 10.4 pretty much, roughly we'll have monthly patches that will be coming through, and that will be either through hotfixes or service packs or cumulative patches. So a hotfix will contain bug fixes for the whole Informatica platform, meaning for EDC, for DQ, and DI and DQ, as well as the client packages like for the developer. Service packs will be EDC and DIQ only, as well as the developer client, and then cumulative patches are only for EDC. These patching, the patching level is tracked in the version numbers, and so you've got your latest patch level at the moment, which is 10.5011, where the last one stands for the cumulative patch, 1 but last one is the service pack level, and the 0 is the hotfix level. In terms of upcoming patches, we've got the next cumulative patch 10.5012, which will be released this week, and the next hotfix 10.5.1 will be released at the end of September. So here we got a link of some more useful resources which you might want to review in your own time. First of all, we have an Informatica University course which takes you through all the new features of EDC 10.5. So it's a free course. You can enroll, and it will again talk about the new cluster infrastructure, and it will also go more in depth on any new 10.5 features for your catalog users. There's another general overview presentation which will just purely talk about the new 10.5 features. We have an upgrade experience presentation as well, which will give you a demo on the actual upgrade. As always, you have your documentation set, where obviously you want to have a look at the installation guide as well as the upgrade guide. And then I've put in one additional link to a KB article, which gives you more detailed information on the new SSL requirements in 10.5. So that concludes the presentation regarding EDC 10.5. Just a quick overview and some more information about the upgrade. We can then now switch to any Q&A if there are any questions left. So just put them in the chat window and we can take it from there.
Hi everyone, please post your questions in the Q&A box. We will try and answer them.
Okay, thanks everyone. We've got quite a few questions that came in. We just go through them. We've been answering quite a few as we went along. So let me just give a quick overview of the questions we had. So first question that came in was how is the EDC platform differing from IDQ and Power Center? So just like in 10.4, EDC services, they are created in the Informatica domain, so similar to DQ and Power Center. We have been talking about EDC here, but 10.5 obviously also contains Power Center, DQ, IDQ, DI and DQ. Regarding the rerun of the scanners, that was covered in the presentation. There's a list of reruns that are required. You can review that in the offline in the print out of the presentation. Advanced scanners integrated in 10.5. So it's no longer a separate install now in 10.5. However, it still has a separate UI for configuring and running the resources. A question regarding databases. The question is, do we have to install a separate DB for EDC 10.5 for repository? So we are assuming that you are talking about the model repository service there. So the general recommendation is that there is a standalone MRS for storing the resource configuration metadata. But that can be a new schema on an existing database. So the Informatica Cluster Service itself is using the MongoDB and Postgres, which is taken care of by the cluster service itself. So there is no admin as such required in creating schemas of databases for that. Can we retire the infrastructure that was already installed for 10.4? So this is possible. So if, let's imagine that you had an internal cluster in 10.4. So once you've taken all of the required backups, in the upgrade steps, you will see that you will be doing a clean cluster command of the existing environment, and that will then remove all of the old HTTP binaries. I think the Postgres will need to be uninstalled manually, but then once that's all done, you will be able to repurpose those nodes as new Informatica 10.5 cluster nodes. Okay, there's another question about rescanning, which we have covered. How to schedule scanners via third-party scheduler via command line or API. So anything like this, any kind of calls, we are recommending the API. And yeah, if you look in the KB and look for the EDC REST API, you will be able to find the guide with the exact syntax. REST API. Then there was a question that came in regarding what's the difference between using an EDC agent versus using a direct source. So the EDC agent is required in case there are Windows binaries or Windows authentication that is required to access the source. Somebody was asking about SAP data service as a source. So that isn't listed in the PAM as such. So if you go in the PAM of the Informatica network, you can see all of the supported EDC data sources. So it's not listed there. So I would say if you want to clarify that specific data source, please open a support case and we can check that out internally for you if that's on the roadmap or not. Okay, how to query the scheme runtimes from the backend database versus the monitoring tab. So all that information is stored in Mongo, in the Mongo database, where you can get a graphical overview, and we don't really have any queries or don't support any queries as such on our backend databases. I'm not sure if that information is directly available in an API. That's something I would need to check. But generally, just like with our MRS and our domain databases, we typically don't recommend or don't support direct queries on the database tables. And then another question that came in regarding Windows Server for Cognos agent is continued in 10.5. So yes, that is still using the EDC agent because you are using the Windows Server. Question about the similarity discovery. Do we, in the slides where we talked about 3 nodes clustered, so do we have the similarity discovery on one of those nodes or on a separate node and make it a 4-node cluster? So what we need to bear in mind is that similarity discovery is resource heavy and it's limited to about 4 resources to limit the number of CPU and RAM usage. So we can run it on the gateway nodes, so you can run it on the gateway nodes because that typically won't be as busy as the worker nodes. Or if you really need more resources to be able to run more of the similarity discovery at the time, then yes, please, you can dedicate one node that is going to specifically take care of the similarity discovery. Any update to the scanner jobs and task names? So the naming convention has changed now. Obviously, we're not using yarn anymore. So you'll see a difference in the monitoring tab of the EDC admin because we have different phases now, and you can find more specific information, or you'll be able to derive what each phase is doing. You'll also be able to click through to the log files quite easily. For upgrade, is it an in-place upgrade, or do we need new services? So you can use an in-place upgrade, and that's what I discussed in the slides. It's also possible to do a parallel upgrade, where you would keep your 10.4 environment up and running. You would then install a new 10.5 domain, where you set up your cluster service and you set up your catalog service, and then you would just go through the steps of doing the migration of the content. So if you look in the upgrade guide, you will see the comments on how to back up the 10.4 contents and then be able to restore them into your 10.5 EDC. So both are an option. And hardware-wise, as I said before, the requirements are the same, so you can repurpose the old Hadoop nodes into new Informatica ICS nodes. So the scheduling comments we talked about, they are the same as in 10.5, using the REST API. Data domains, indeed, data domains do need to be re-imported. So yes, we do recommend, and it's also documented in the post-installation steps. After the installation, you should re-import the 10.5 data domains. That was another question about similarity. Well, okay, when is EDC 10.5.1 released? So that is at the end of September or beginning of October. Just earlier, I also mentioned that 10.5.0.1.2, the cumulative patch, is due this week. That might be delayed slightly. So yeah, if you need an ETA for that, yeah, please contact support, because it looks like that might not be this week after all. EDC 10.5.1 is end of this month or beginning of next month. The percentage of customers have upgraded 10.5 in production at the time. We don't have an exact number. As support engineers, we are helping our customers in specific regions. But I think it's fair to say that at least 50% of our customers are either in production already with 10.5 or have taken steps in upgrading their, let's say, development or acceptance environment. So we've seen quite a big uptake in the amount of customers getting ready and making sure that they've moved off 10.4 way well before the end of life date of March 2020. Can we run the Informatica Catalog Service on Amazon Linux? So that is not supported. You can refer to the PAM for exact operating systems that we are supporting. 10.5.1, when does that need to be investigated? I'm not sure what that means, but 10.5.1 is a hotfix, so that is not an upgrade. So yeah, once 10.5.1 is released, you will be able to upgrade to 10.5.1 as well. That will be in October then. Are there any known bugs from 10.5 which we'll have to address right away? So yes, we do recommend that you, if you are starting your 10.5 journey today, we would recommend that you directly go to 10.5.0.1.1, which is the latest service pack and cumulative patch. So yes, please also always make sure that you go straight away to the latest service pack, cumulative patch, or hotfix level, so you don't end up facing issues that are fixed already in later service packs. In terms of licensing, can we use a Power Center license for EDC? So, yeah, EDC is a specific license, so a Power Center license would not cover EDC. You can reach out to your account manager to check if you are licensed or if you would like to do a POC on EDC. Do we need the advanced scanner for Snowflake in 10.5? So yes, Snowflake is now deprecated as a standard scanner, and the recommendation is to use the EDC advanced scanner. I have already installed 10.4 internal clusters. What additional components are required to install? Do we still need database in 10.5? I think we've covered the components that are required now in 10.5 and what is no longer needed in 10.4. Are the processes to clean, repair the cluster totally different for 10.5? Do we get any additional UIs to access? So the clean cluster command is pretty much the same. It's an InfaCMD ICS clean cluster, which can clean up all the Mongo, Nomad, Solar, Zookeeper components. Repair and replay, we assume that you are talking about graph repair. So that is no longer an issue in 10.5 now because we're not using that anymore. In terms of UIs, from an Informatica perspective, it's the same EDC admin and EDC UI for the end users. We obviously don't have Ambari anymore or the Yarn UI, but Nomad, for instance, also has a UI where you can monitor jobs. Can you paste this YouTube presentation here? Try now. So you can pick up the link from the Q&A. Are there new ports that we will need to open? So yes, the ports are different now, given that we are using new technologies. The port numbers are different. You can refer to the KB, which has a list of all the ports. Obviously, ports can be customized as well. So by default, we use the default ports. Let's say for Zookeeper, we use 2181. All the ports can be customized should that be needed. How to add additional nodes? Yes, okay, it's comma separated. Recommended size in the cluster service shared file system. I don't think we have a size guide for that. I need to check that. I can come back to you. We are taking notes of the questions. So if there's any unanswered ones, I can get back to you on those online. The MRS support Postgres. I think we MRS. Model repository also supports Postgres now. You can refer to the PAM, product availability matrix on the Informatica network. So Postgres SQL for MRS versions are supported 12.3 and 11.8. Question regarding SSL. Does that mean connectivity will be broken? So in the SSL I was mentioning, is the SSL certificates that are required for the cluster services such as Nomad and MongoDB. So what we need to do, most of the time, you as a customer, you will have your Informatica domain, which is using a CA signed certificate. Now that CA signed certificate will most likely not be able to sign new certificates. So what we'll need to do is we will need to create a new CSR, which will be used to request new certificates for the cluster nodes. That will then get signed by the CA. We will receive the new certificates, and then those will need to be packaged in Infa key store, in the key store, in the trust store for the cluster service, and then uploaded to the cluster service. But if you refer back to the one of the last slides in the presentation, you will be able to pick up a link to the document that goes through all the commands to set up the SSL. Do we provide additional support to customers to helping them move to 10.5? Yes, by all means. If you have any specific questions or you'd like to set up a specific, you have specific questions for your environment and 10.5 upgrade, please reach out to your usual support team and they will discuss with you. I think else. I think we are okay in terms of the question. There are a few. I am aware there are a few that are unanswered, but I think in the interest of time we can have those up now. There are a few for which I need to go and check documentation because I don't have the answer on top of my head. But yeah, we will take those offline. So thank you very much again for attending. I hope it's been useful, and yeah, look forward to hosting another Tech Tuesday session with you in the future. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for joining.